Right.
Does it go next from there? I guess like what the court would do is try to see, I guess like a little means end situation.
Well, to be
If it's
clear, the court never adopted Jackson's framework. This is just Jackson, right?
uh-huh.
In fact, the courts rejected his framework. But just under Jackson, this is not a test that's easy to apply. It doesn't really have any sort of bright lines.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know how much authorization is enough? So, for example, there was another case involving the seizure of property after the Iranian hostage crisis. And Congress enacted some laws that are sort of in the ballpark. Right? Is that enough? How close is close? Right? What if Congress ratifies it after the fact, like Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus? Does that sort of make it okay? We're getting into sort of not tricky areas that don't really have very good answers. Not solid. I'll take your point. Solid waste, perhaps. But all right. Anything else in Jackson? Now, the dissent was by Chief Justice Vinson, joined by Reed and Minton. Again, not three justices that you'll probably mention. I don't think we'll mention them again this semester. But they basically take a different perspective. Say, throughout history, presidents have done stuff that wasn't clearly authorized in times of crisis. They cite Washington, they cite Lincoln, they cite Jefferson. And they say basically it's not up to the courts to sort of intervene. Trent?
Do you think this case would have gone the other way if it was FDR instead of Truman doing it?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Then again, though, let's say that during World War II, FDR seized property, which he actually did. I think it'll be harder to stop him. Again, this is after Korematsu, after these other decisions. Like, okay, we're worried about fascism. We're going to stop this. It's very hard to separate a case from the time it was decided. And the same issue decided 10 years earlier during the height of World War II, I think will come out very differently. That's my answer. They say the president was in emergency. They need to take these mills. They need to prevent destruction, and they have to stop it. All right, but that was just the dissent. Now, perhaps one of the ironies of this case is that they actually returned the steel mills after this case came down, and there was no real impact on the steel production. And I think what this teaches you, very often the governments can exaggerate, but how do you know? It goes back to the core mindset. How do you know when they're telling the truth, how do you know when they're not? You don't know. There's a story that after this case was decided, Justice Black had a drink with Truman, and Truman said, and paraphrase, only if I can find the exact quote. I think it's in here somewhere. Justice Black invited Truman over. He said, "Hugo, I don't care much for your law, but by golly, this bourbon is good." It's a good story. So even though the Supreme Court just ruled against Truman decisively in a 6-3 decision, I think that they recognize that following this court order and other things was perhaps more important than sort of taking the mills. Truman could have said, "Okay, Chief Justice Black, go down to Youngstown. See what you can do there. You're going to see if you can open the door, let everyone back in." The strike lasted for about 50 days. That's long. It was 2 months, and eventually they worked it out. All right. Questions on Youngstown? All right. Okay, questions in Youngstown. All right, let's move from the Korean War to the present. And it's rare for me to teach a case that's so fresh and so new. It doesn't happen very often, but this is one of them. Trump against the United States. Where do I start? I just don't know where to start. So you were all alive during the 2020 election, I think. I just asked, but I think you were all here. Okay, good. You were all sentient. One of the overarching themes of the election was concern about election fraud. That even before the election happened, President Trump was accusing people of trying to subvert the election. Keep in mind, this was during COVID. People were sort of locked down. They were voting remotely. They were voting in these drop boxes. There were lots of concerns in many places. Okay. Election night happens. the votes are coming in, and it looks like Trump was going to lose the election. Trump, in any event, said, "No, I won." Okay. As the votes came in and were tallied, every official count showed that Trump did not have enough votes to proceed. But there were efforts to try to change the outcome. Now, you may not know this, but under the Constitution, we don't need presidential elections. What? States have the power to simply appoint electors, the state legislatures. In the early republic, many states did this. Until the 19th century, some states appointed electors to the legislature. After Bush v. Gore was going on in Florida, the Florida legislature considered just appointing electors for Bush. It didn't do it, but they considered it. So Trump and some of his colleagues had a plan that you'd have these alternate slates of electors. That in certain states where there were allegations of disputed votes, that the state legislature would come in and appoint other electors. So the plan was, on the day when the electors vote, same day nationwide, we'll have our own people go vote. Alternate slates of electors. And then we'll have Congress count our slates, not the other slates. Okay? Now, how would this be done? The president of the Senate, that is the vice president, who was Mike Pence, was urged to at least pause the deliberations on January 6th, if not count these other slates. Pence decided, I think correctly, that he didn't have the power to do that, and he told Trump about this. Then we get to January 6th. Okay? You all know what happened that day. Trump gave a speech. There were riots at the Capitals. The counting of the votes was delayed for several hours. Eventually they resumed, and Biden was certified as president. Okay. Fast forward about 2 years, Attorney General Garland appoints a special counsel, a guy named Jack Smith, to basically investigate what happened on J6. Okay? Fun fact, I actually argued against Jack Smith in court. I thought he was unconstitutionally appointed. I won. But that's a different story. Smith argued that he could indict Trump for his conduct while he was in office on January 6th and the days before. The federal court in D.C. heard this case. Trump argued that he had absolute immunity from criminal prosecution, absolute immunity. The trial court rejected the claim of absolute immunity, went to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals did something in the middle. They didn't quite say absolute, but they said maybe, maybe not. It wasn't really clear what they were saying. And the case went to the Supreme Court. It was argued, I think it was in April or May of last year. So just about a year ago. And the court decided in July of 2024. So this is a brand new case. We're looking at this case through kind of a different lens than we read in July of 24. When this case was decided in July, it was not all clear Trump would prevail in the election. It was looking actually unlikely at the time. Had Trump lost the election, whatever happened in this case could have gone forward. He would have been held on trial and maybe convicted, maybe not, who knows. As all know, he won in 24. Shortly after he prevailed in the election, Jack Smith threw in the towel and said that we're not going to proceed with this case further. You can't prosecute the sitting president. It makes no sense to start a trial when the guy will be in office in a few months. So all the lingering issues in this case about what kind of conduct was immune or not doesn't matter. But it matters in a sense, but it has no actual relevance for today. In theory, at least, suppose that someone can prosecute Trump in 4 years when he's out of office. I think the odds of happening are close to zero. So what was viewed as kind of this earth-shattering case not even 8 or 9 months ago does not have the same pop anymore. And that's what I mean by the saying, we don't know what's important today. We never know what's going to be important. We just have no way of knowing it. And whatever ruling for the ages the justices want to write, will probably be a small chunk of my casebook in the next edition. It won't be 50 pages. I'm sorry the reading was so long. You got to have your system. Probably won't do this one again. All right. So again, don't look at this case as February of 2025. Look at this case that you are April or May of 2024. That's before the election. You know what's going to happen. And the J6 stuff those people haven't been pardoned yet, right? You don't know what's going to happen. Query, does the J6 pardon apply to Trump himself? It's actually a fun question. Yeah, maybe. Doesn't. Because there's people convicted, right? People charged. So he has been charged, so it doesn't apply to him. But it could have applied to him. All right. So let me talk about immunity. Does anyone know what qualified immunity is? QI? What's qualified immunity, Michael? You shaking your head?
It's like an immunity you get, and you can also lose it depending on your conduct, or maybe not.
Kinda.
Is it like people under like certain sectors of the government like you can't talk about stuff, so they're unconstitutional?
Kind of. Shreya?
It's more of like if they violate their constitutional right for whatever reason, they kind of get a pardon. Like they.
Okay, let me ask you a question, right? If a police officer beats you up, can you sue the police officer for damages? Yeah, you probably can, because the law says you can't beat them up. But let's say the police officer searches you in a way that maybe the court haven't resolved before. You think that that search was unconstitutional, but it hasn't really been settled. Can you sue the police officer for damages? No. The reason why is what's called qualified immunity. Okay? Most government officials have some sort of immunity that you can't sue the government. You have sovereign immunity, you can't sue the states. And most police officers, government officials, have qualified immunity. What does qualified mean? It means if the government officer violates some clearly established law, you can sue for damages, right? The law says you can't beat up defendants, right? You can't beat up prisoners. You can sue for damages. But let's say there's some issue that's not really clear, right? Let's say they did something that no court's ever held you can't do before. In that case, if it's not clearly established law, he didn't break any law, well then he can't be sued for damages. Judges have not qualified immunity. Judges have absolute immunity. Can you sue a judge because you don't like his ruling? Oh, that'd be fun. Right, you can't do that. Judges have absolute immunity. Prosecutors. Can you sue a prosecutor saying, oh man, you charged me with a crime. I don't like that. I'm going to sue you. No. Prosecutors have near absolute immunity. There's something called malicious prosecution, but that's not going for damages against the prosecutor. So lots of government officials have immunity. What about the president? So there have been a number of cases, there have been a couple of cases in American history concerning presidential immunity. One of the very first cases involved Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, sir. Right, who is Aaron Burr? Aaron Burr was Jefferson's vice president. Aaron Burr also killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. Aaron Burr also, this is kind of uncertain, tried to raise up an army against the United States. Interesting dude, right? He lost the election of 1800 to Jefferson, and then he went off the rails. Burr was tried with treason during the Jefferson administration. And who presided over that trial? Chief Justice John Marshall. Ain't that something? And Burr said, I want these documents from Jefferson. These documents will help my defense. And Jefferson said, screw off, I'm not giving them to you. And then Chief Justice Marshall said, well, you know, the president has a general immunity from process, but when you need evidence for someone's defense, you have to provide it. So even then they recognize there's some immunity that the president has. He's different than everyone else. By the way, Jefferson never actually complied. Roberts doesn't like this point. He gets very mad about this point. Jefferson gave a redacted version of the document to the court. If the court says, give me the document, you give it to him only part of it, have you complied with the order? No. We don't want to talk about that part. The reality doesn't matter to the court. Then fast forward almost 100 and something years to President Nixon. President Nixon had these recording devices in the White House, right? These little tape recorders. And whenever someone came to the Oval Office, he'd start recording them. And these tapes had evidence about crimes, the Watergate break-ins, and the cover-up. And there were a bunch of people being prosecuted by the government for the Watergate offenses, and they said, we want those tapes to help our defense. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, Nixon, give them over. You need them for the defense. You don't have immunity here. Nixon turned them over, resigned shortly thereafter. So again, some immunity, but not absolute. But they have another Nixon case, right? The first one's called U.S. versus Nixon, and you have Nixon versus Fitzgerald. I'll just call it Fitzgerald to make it easier. In Fitzgerald, you had a civil suit, right? Nixon, when he was president, had basically smack about this guy named Fitzgerald who said bad things about him. And then Fitzgerald sued Nixon for damages. And the Supreme Court said, well, that suit cannot go forward. Why? When the president's acting with his official duties, sort of the outer perimeter of his powers, he has absolute immunity. The court gave the president absolute immunity for civil suits when he's acting his official duties within the outer perimeter of his powers. Absolute immunity. That was broad. You cannot sue the president for his official actions. Why? The president's got to make some tough calls, guys. He's got to make some tough decisions. And if he's afraid of personal liability, he can be like, ooh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that. I know it's good for the country, but it might hurt my bank account. The court says the president must have bold powers to act unencumbered, uninhibited by the threat of lawsuits. So again, this was 1980-something, early 80s. Nixon versus Fitzgerald, 82 or 84, can't remember. Fast forward a few more years. Bill Clinton was president. Bill Clinton was also a ladies' man, I suppose. And while this is not good, while he was governor of, I met Monica Lewinsky once. You know that? I was at a conference with her. Very nice, very pleasant. Yeah, I said a few words. Hello, nothing more than that.
What was she doing at the conference?
It was a Forbes 30 under 30 conference, and I was there. Okay. So when Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas, he was alleged to have sexually abused Paula Jones. And Paula Jones sued him while he was in the White House. So again, this was not official conduct. In fact, it was conduct before he became president. And the question was, is the president immune from a civil suit while he's in office from his earlier conduct? Again, this was not Fitzgerald. This was not about his official act. This was a governor roughing up a woman in a hotel room while he was in state office. And the Supreme Court ruled against President Clinton. The court said the president lacks immunity from civil suit, okay, for his unofficial actions from before he was president. Clinton said, wait a minute, this sort of lawsuit will be a distraction, right? I'm the president. I have so many duties and responsibilities. I shouldn't have to deal with these silly lawsuits that take away from my authority to save the American people and defend the free world. And the Supreme Court said to him, no go. And then Justice Stevens said an opinion that did not age well. He said, well, there's not much history of people suing the president. We don't think this is going to become a big problem. The number of lawsuits against the president now is just sort of staggering. It's nonstop. Trump was sued more times than I can count for everything you can imagine. Does it cause a distraction? I don't know. Anyway, so then that's Clinton versus Jones. One other case. Can a sitting president be indicted for a crime? The Supreme Court had never before considered that one. Can a sitting president be indicted? There was an opinion from the government basically saying that no, the president can't be indicted. And the reason why might be obvious. Who actually is going to be indicting the president? Someone within the executive branch. If someone in the executive branch tried to indict the president, he's getting fired. It won't happen. Now, we had an independent counsel that came later, which suggests that maybe someone independent from the president could fire him. Could a state prosecutor indict the former president? I'm sorry, could the state prosecutor indict the sitting president? For tomorrow, could Fannie Willis in Atlanta indict President Trump? I think the answer is no. It's not clear. I think under the Supremacy Clause in McCulloch v. Maryland, I don't think you could have a state official putting the president in jail. This is actually my exam question maybe 7 years ago. Could New York indict the sitting president? I think the answer is not. But can you indict a former president for his conduct in office? Can you indict a former president? He's out of office. He's not in office anymore. For his conduct in office. Again, as best as I can tell, no former president's ever been indicted. Until Trump. And that's what leads us to Trump against the United States. Right, which again is a case that seemed really important last June and just no one wants to care about it today. I think when this goes into the casebook, it might be less than 10 pages. I think a lot of it just drops out. I think the entire section on, well, what about the evidence? And, well, there was never a trial. That's why the evidence was important, right? Because there was going to be a trial. We never got that trial. All this stuff just didn't matter. Justice Barrett, which I didn't even assign because it just doesn't matter. Right? She was an evidence professor. She really cares about evidence. She really cares about evidence rules. That's what she knows. It just doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Okay. So let's walk through, and I want to put on the screen my trichotomy, if you will. All right. So let's walk through the court's analysis. What's funny is that Chief Justice Roberts opens with Robert Jackson. He invokes Jackson, but I don't think he actually follows Jackson. All right. All right. So, what am I up to? Yeah, Shrey. Okay. So, Shrey, let me ask you a question, please. What does conclusive and preclusive powers mean? Conclusive and preclusive powers. What does that mean? Conclusive and preclusive. It's funny. He never defines it, by the way.
Conclusive might mean that there's like a limit to the powers, kind of like decisive.
Mm-hmm.
And then preclusive is like preventative, so like restrictive.
Let me ask you the question differently, Shreya. When Congress, so what actually was Trump charged with? What was the actual charge he was charged with violating? What law?
It was the election making knowingly false claims.
Right. It basically making false statements about the election, right? Shreya, were these laws passed to go after the president in particular? No. They were passed just as general laws and people can be charged with all the time. Juliana, let me ask you a question, please. Generally, does Congress have the power to criminalize, interfering in elections? Generally. So why did Trump win this case then, if Congress has this power generally?
Because it was against a former president.
But why can Congress not in this case criminalize Trump's actions?
Because some argued that they were his official acts while he...
Okay, so let's go back to our chart here, Juliana, sorry. This is a case where Congress says, President, you cannot do this. You cannot interfere with elections. And what does the president say? Because of? Under Article? Good. So conclusive and preclusive means if the president has this core executive power, this Article 2 power to do something, that's it. That's the conclusion, right? Shreya said that's the end of the story. It does not matter what Congress thinks. If the president has this power under the Constitution, then a mere statute cannot control it. It's conclusive. It's the end of the story. It's preclusive. It prevents Congress from regulating him. It's conclusive and preclusive. That's what that means, right? The president has this authority. We're talking now number 3. This is actually Angelica's point from a few minutes ago, right? We're at number 3. Taylor. The president's authority is conclusive. Conclusive means that's the end of the story. Preclusive means he prevents Congress from regulating him. Congress can't touch the guy. Right? When the president's powers are conclusive, it disables Congress. Congress has no power to control the president's discretion. When the president's acting under his constitutional authority, Congress has no power. For example, the example he gives, the pardon power. Could Congress tell the president who to pardon or not to pardon someone? No. The president can recognize foreign countries. Can Congress force the president to recognize a foreign country? No. Can Congress force the president to appoint someone to an office? No. Can Congress force the president to repeal a veto or not issue a veto? No. The court says the president is absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for conduct within his exclusive sphere of constitutional authority. The president is absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for conduct within the exclusive sphere of his constitutional authority. Full stop. If you're in that what Nixon versus Fitzgerald called the outer perimeter, this outer sphere of authority, Congress can't touch this. Yeah, Oscar.
So conclusive and preclusive are not mutually exclusive.
Say it again.
Conclusive and preclusive are not mutually exclusive.
Oh my God! Why did you say it like that?
Like if conclusive exists, preclusive must exist.
I don't know. It's not that clear. I think what I'll say is if there's a power that falls in this outer sphere, Congress can regulate it. I think if it's preclusive, it's probably also if it's conclusive, it's also preclusive, but I'm not sure. The court doesn't really go into that sort of depth. So really, the opinion starts here in zone 3, right? This is the case where Congress says, you can't do this. And the president says, yes, I can. Now, there's an argument that we're actually not in zone 3. There's something called the clear statement rule. You know, the clear statement rule? This came up in the opinion. I'm not sure if it was important. Right? The clear statement rule saying is that we generally presume that Congress is not regulating the president. We generally presume that Congress is not regulating the president unless there's a clear statement saying, we're passing statutes to ban the president from doing this. What Trump argued in this case is, because these statutes are passed generally, we presume they don't apply to the president. The court didn't take that argument here, but it was argued vigorously. So there might be an argument that we're not actually in zone 3, that absent a clear statement, Congress never said anything about the president. Why? The president has powers of election that regular people don't, right? He has the power to take care of the laws faithfully executed. He enforces immigration law. He makes sure that everything is enforced properly. Okay. Yeah. Is it a hand?
Yeah.
Good.
So like, if there's no like countervailing thing coming from Congress, it's still not in zone 1, so it's in zone 2 then.
Well, yeah, I don't think you'd say it's zone 1. If it's unclear if Congress said anything about it, it'll probably be closer to zone 2. And Robert sort of mentions the zone of twilight where there's a shared authority, and he's sort of not really sure, right? I'm not trying to duck your question, but I think the opinion itself is not entirely clear on this one. I'll come back to the minute. I'll make another point now. When you're arguing a case, you have to make a strategy, right? The special counsel Jackson argued this case. Could he have argued that Nixon versus Fitzgerald was wrong if overruled? He could have. Could he say that there's no criminal immunity because there's no civil immunity? He could have argued that. But as Angelica, did he seek to overrule Nixon versus Fitzgerald? Was he okay with civil immunity? But he was opposed to criminal immunity. Why did he think that civil immunity is desirable, but criminal immunity is not? What do you mean harder to prove?
The criminal immunity was harder. It should be scrutinized more because it's a lot more goes into it, I guess.
You're right. Tell me more. I think you're on the right track. What's the difference between the civil suit and a criminal suit, Angelica?
Damages.
Right. The consequence of a civil suit is damages, and the consequence of a criminal suit is jail, right? But you said there are sort of protections that go into it, and Sotomayor makes this point, I think, well, why might we be less worried about criminal than civil? Bobby?
Beyond a reasonable doubt, jury.
Sure. Good, right? So the Constitution imposes a number of procedural protections on criminal processes. So, for example, the standard, you have preponderance of the evidence versus proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You have a constitutional right to a jury trial. You have jury in civil mostly, but not by the Constitution. Also, who brings criminal cases? Government prosecutors, right? Who brings a civil suit? Anyone with a complaint in the United States, right? So what, and Justice Sotomayor makes this point, I think, quite well in her dissent. She explains that there are a lot of procedural protections baked into the criminal justice system. There's rules about grand juries, right? There's rules about evidence. There's rules about right to counsel, right? There are all these various rules that make it safer, that there's less risk of a criminal prosecution than civil. Marilyn, how does the majority respond to this? Does Chief Justice Roberts think that, which does he think is worse, criminal or civil? Yeah, why does Roberts think that criminal is worse? Why is the risk greater of the president being sued than the president being indicted in a criminal court?
I don't remember the answer.
Zoe?
I believe it was that courts cannot hear criminal prosecution reviewing such acts.
Well, you can appeal a criminal case. I'm not sure what you mean.
I don't know, that was one of the notes I had. I'm not sure what I meant by that.
Anyone, why is Roberts think criminal is worse? Taylor?
Maybe because of your freedom is taken.
Well, that's for darn sure, yeah. The consequence of a civil suit, you can settle it, have a damage award. Criminal, you go to jail. Yeah.
I thought it was maybe because he would be chilled in the future from taking acts.
What do you think the president's more worried about, being indicted or being sued?
Or indicted, excuse me.
Which one is it?
Yes.
Which one? Which one?
Indicted.
Correct. Okay. What else? Oscar?
I would just say, if your president's in jail, whatever the other president doing.
Well, again, this is not about a sitting president. It's about a former president. There's a difference, right? I think everyone agrees in this one, even Jack Smith, that you can't indict a sitting president. The question is a former president who's out of office. Lauren?
Oh, I was just going to say for the criminal aspect, it's maybe worse because it could cause him, it like undermines his ability to make decisions.
Why?
The public, because he's worried about the consequences.
Yeah, in other words, if the president's in office now, it's like, I think we need to bomb this country, but I'm worried that my predecessor might indict me for murder. What should I do? That hesitation. That's what keeps John Roberts awake at night. He's afraid that this risk of criminal prosecution of a former president will silence his action. He says all these other protections about, the grand jury and the right to jury trial and proof beyond reasonable doubt, that's all great, but that doesn't actually answer the question. And Roberts says, if we give absolute immunity for civil suits, why the heck would we not do the same for criminal? Right? In fact, Roberts says the need for immunity is greater for criminal than for civil. With civil, you can settle it. By the way, Bill Clinton and Paula Jones, they settled that suit. It never went to a jury trial. It embarrassed them to hell. Right? It did not go to a jury trial. They settled that suit out. But when you have a prosecutor bent on throwing someone in jail, they don't always settle things out. Is your hand? Is that a hand? Right. So the crux here for the court is Jack Smith did not ask the court to overrule Nixon against Fitzgerald. He didn't say that case was wrongly decided. That case recognized the structural reasons for immunity in a civil case. Given that, it's not difficult to see why the court found this also immunity for criminal. Justice Sotomayor says, she says this in a footnote, basically, the basis for civil immunity is wrong. She doesn't quite say that, but she implies it. And I think if she were up to her, she would overrule Fitzgerald. No one asked her to do it. She couldn't. But when you litigate a case, you have to make your choices. And they made their choices here of how to proceed. Oscar's a hand up before? Okay. Yes, Angelica?
I get this piece, but what he was being perfect is not like what Justice Roberts was describing. Like, it's nothing to do with war or anything. Like, it's like I think they should have based it on more of their conduct, versus it's not as extreme.
Was there any core? So this is the point that Sotomayor makes in her dissent, right? Did the court have to decide a lot of these issues? In other words, did this case concern core executive power, like issuing a veto or issuing a pardon? It was stuff on the fringe, on the periphery, right? So this gets into the weeds. I got time. This gets into the weeds. When you're writing a Supreme Court decision, you have a lot of choices to make. And in this case, there were attempts to broker a compromise. There's reporting in the Supreme Court. There are always these leaks. I hate these leaks, but I think they're mostly accurate. And Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor were willing to basically compromise, saying, look, we will join a majority opinion which doesn't create this broad rule, but simply holds that the particular actions Trump did might be immune, might not be immune, and lower courts can decide. And Roberts like, I don't care. Roberts usually is very intent on negotiating and making compromise, but here he's like, I don't care. I got my votes. I don't need you. In fact, he almost lost Amy Coney Barrett. Amy almost just jumped ship on the evidence issues. Just trivial issue. She almost jumped ship on that one. He's like, look, I got my guys. I got my five votes. I don't need you. And he's, I'm going to write a ruling for the ages, what Gorsuch called it. Ruling for the ages. God, guys, just they're not on Olympus, right? These are not gods. They need to just level down just a little bit. But this ruling for the ages. And so, to Angelica's point, this is not a case about Congress trying to criminalize a veto or a pardon, right? This is not what's here. But the court wrote this very sweeping, broad opinion. And I think Roberts addresses this at the very end of his opinion. He has these concerns. He's worried about what might be called lawfare. Have you ever heard the phrase lawfare? It's a phrase that's not well understood. The way I would define lawfare is taking what's a political dispute and putting it into the courts. That's how I define lawfare. And what he's saying is, I am worried about enfeebling, about weakening the presidency. Right? I'm worried that each president starts indicting his predecessor. By the way, you know who loves this decision? Joe Biden. You know who loves this thing? He'll never say it out loud. He's like, thank God, right? He probably breathed a sigh of relief with this case. Because you know who's going to get indicted without this case? Joe Biden. So Roberts, I think, was actually more about Biden than Trump, to be honest with you. Roberts is not always so clear. Roberts is saying we cannot have a system of government where each president starts indicting his predecessor. I mean, look, there was a special counsel, but he was appointed because Biden wanted it. And the guy indicted Trump, who was, again, Biden's leading opponent. I mean, it's just sort of taking a step back. The current administration was indicting the guy running against him. Just think about that for a second, right? That as Biden was trying to run for president, his subordinates were prosecuting his opponent as a criminal. Right? The situation is unusual, right? But this happens a lot in other countries. It happens quite a bit. So Roberts was more worried about that happening than giving this sweeping immunity. Now the dissent says, wait a minute. By giving this immunity, you are enabling presidents to basically break the law, that they're now above the law. This phrase she uses over and over again, that they're above the law. They're above the law. And I think you have to decide what risk is Roberts worried about more. The presidents will start breaking the law and start committing all these overt crimes, or that the political process will be thrown into the courts, and the courts will have to decide over and over again whether a president should go to jail or not. Roberts was an executive branch lawyer. He worked for Reagan. He understood what it means when presidents are under siege. And he's like, we need to stop this. No mas. As whatever Roberts did in the Obamacare decision, whatever he did with DACA, whether he did with the census, none of that stuff matters. This is the opinion he's probably most proud of, if I had to ask him. He's proud of this one. He believes it, and he didn't even try to get a compromise. He could have like a 7-2 or an 8-1 decision on this. He didn't care. He wanted this one to be for the ages. He believes in his fiber, every one of his opinions. He's proud of this one. Yes, sir.
I think in the opinion where they talk about the breadth of the president's discretionary responsibility, how far outside of the, or I guess, how do you evaluate how far outside of the court power is discretionary policy extend? Because like some of them seem to be covered under top secret or like Patriot Act issues or other issues that are just you cover with like it's top secret, so I can't tell you, and it's discretionary.
Right. So there's a couple things in that question I just want to unpack. So the first question, which I think is important, is how do you tell the difference between official and unofficial acts? And the court basically says we're not going to do it. We'll let the lower court figure this out. Now, again, I have to explain the timing of this, right? I have to explain the timing of this. When this was going on, the lower court was saying, okay, I want to have a trial as soon as possible. Get this stuff tried over the summer of 24. The Supreme Court intervened and said, no, don't do a trial, we'll hear this first. By the Supreme Court intervening, they made it virtually impossible for the court to have a trial before the election. The judge wanted to have a trial before the election. That way, when people go to the polls, they can see if Trump was a felon or not. That's the upshot, right? And by the court taking it, they made it impossible for there to be a trial. But imagine the court had said, we will decide now. These issues are official. These issues are not. That way, you have a clean trial right away. You don't have to decide all these legal issues. The court could have done that. But the court didn't. They granted the case, delaying the process, and then sent it back to the lower court to figure out what's going to happen. And the lower court basically said, what are we going to do here? And it took actually a couple months, and eventually they started having these briefings filed, but then it was November, and the election happened, and Trump prevailed. And the judge was like, well, now what? And Jackson says, well, grumble, 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 we're not going to try him. So, to Sheldon's question, the difficult challenge of deciding what's official and unofficial never happened. We never got that. Now again, January 6th happened in 2021. Trump was not indicted until 23. If they had indicted Trump in 2021, we would have had a trial well in advance of the election. In fact, one of Joe Biden's biggest criticisms of Garland is he moved too slowly. He was very deliberate. He was a judge, methodical, and so on. They just charged Trump right away. They've gotten him. And the reason that they didn't charge him right away is they're trying to get something bigger. They wanted to prove he was engaging in insurrection or sedition or something greater. They found no evidence of it. They couldn't make it stick. So they tried to get all people to flip on Trump. Nothing worked. So they tried to go big, and they got nothing out of it. Again, prosecutors make decisions. Have they indicted Trump on... Instead of charging 1,500 J6 people, they just went after Trump. That would have been enough. They could have had the first line of action before he was even a candidate. But they made their decision, and that's how history revealed itself. Okay. But Roberts gave a test. When is something within this outer perimeter? Is this... It's so silly almost. Is this manifestly or palpably beyond his authority? In other words, is this official activity? Yes, if it's within his authority. No, if it's beyond his authority. That's not telling you a darn thing. Right? This is why Justice Sotomayor was so... she was angry, by the way. She was not happy at this one. You can tell when she's upset. She's very upset here at this one. And I think with fair reason. Again, I think I agree with the bottom line, the opinion, but I think Roberts was writing an opinion here that was not as carefully crafted as he could have been. Right? He was writing what he wanted to hear. He was going full Johnny on us, right? It's like, here's Johnny, right? This is what we had here. You know Johnny Carson? Anyone? Okay, good. Sorry. Let's see what else I'm talking about. Oh, there's the evidence issue. This is, again, Justice Barrett was very upset about. By the way, I didn't assign the Barrett concurrence. It's not clear to me that Barrett wrote anything Roberts wrote. She says concurring. She doesn't even say what she agrees with. I don't think she agrees with anything that Roberts wrote. She got very, very much pushed off, and Roberts like, I don't care. I don't need your vote. Truly, it's like, I don't need you. You can go do whatever you want about your evidence. I don't care. So the issue was, if there's a trial, can you introduce as evidence stuff that is within executive power? And Barrett's like, yeah, you can't convict that, but you can have evidence. It's almost character evidence. You taking evidence now? Character evidence, right? Roberts like, no, you can't introduce as evidence, which basically cut off a lot of stuff. In fact, after this case was decided, Jack Smith re-indicted Trump with a slimmed-down indictment where he took out some evidence as well as a reflection of this. Okay. Roberts says his dissents strike a tone of chilling doom. Chilling doom, my goodness. That's wholly disproportionate to what the court actually does today. So in this part, I think Roberts has some merit. He's saying, we have Nixon versus Fitzgerald, we have civil immunity. Is it really that crazy we also have criminal immunity? Right? And I think on that part he's probably right. I wonder if they had to do it all over again if Jack Smith had said overrule Fitzgerald if they have to. But I don't think he could do that. All right. I have a few minutes left. Questions in the majority. I'll do the dissent a little more quickly. Questions on the John Roberts majority? Yeah, this is like Roberts pure, like unadulterated, like 100 proof John Roberts. No? All right. The dissent was by, and also Justice Jackson had dissent. I didn't assign it. You can read it, make some fair points by let me assign the Sotomayor dissent. Sotomayor says this makes a mockery of our government. And she asks, what is the basis in text for immunity? Yeah, there isn't one. Right? There isn't one. This goes back to Justice Black's opinion in the Youngstown case. He's a textualist. What is the basis of immunity under the Constitution? And there really isn't a basis, right? There really isn't one. There's an Article 2. There's an executive power. And in fact, parts of the Constitution sort of presume that a former president might be tried. For example, the impeachment clause says that, after you're impeached and convicted, you can still be tried for a crime. So at least there's some evidence that the framers understood that former presidents would be charged for crimes. Sotomayor doesn't actually disagree with the majority on the official acts, right? I think even if you were to put Sotomayor on a polygraph machine and say, can Congress prohibit a veto? She'll say, no, you cannot. She'd agree with that one. She doesn't say it loudly, but she would agree with that one. But she says, we have to decide this, right? There is no issue here. Nothing Trump did on J6 was official duties, core, right? So why are we deciding this issue for the future? It's such an obvious point. Her real problem is the second one, right? Where there's official acts that are not core, but they're so official, and there's presumptive immunity. What does presumptive immunity mean? They're presumed to be immune unless the government can show otherwise. And the court doesn't really tell us how to decide this for the poor lower court judge who frankly never got the chance to do it. Okay. She says that this decision has no grounding in text. There's no grounding in history. So the majority says there's no precedent of any president ever being indicted. And she says, well, yeah, there's a good reason for that, because no president's ever committed a felony before, right? It's like, which one is it, right? You've never indicted for a president? Has a president ever committed a felony? Might not be true. Query, if your president orders a drone strike on a U.S. citizen, is that murder? Who said definitely? Okay. Yeah, seriously, if the president orders a drone strike on a U.S. citizen, says Anwar al-Aqwi, is that murder? I mean, if the president said, yeah, let's just target black men today, let's just drone strike them out of existence, I'm going to say, yay, no class, right? Presidents have done that. We've ordered assassinations on U.S. assets before. Is that murder? So, is it the case that a president's never committed a felony? Probably not. We just don't talk about it? All right. Sotomayor also says that at a minimum we should allow the evidence in, even if we don't allow for the conviction. One other point, Sotomayor says we should consider motive. We should look at the president's motivations when they do something. And the majority says, no, we can't do that. We can't question the president's motives. The president has many interests that are competing, and we shouldn't scrutinize the president if we were talking to a regular witness. Okay. Questions on the Sotomayor dissent? It's a lot today, I know. A lot of reading. I'm sorry the reading was so heavy. It's just, it's interesting. When there's a new case, I don't know what parts to assign until I teach it. That's why your reading was so long. I wasn't sure. Now I know what to assign for next year. So you're my guinea pigs. Thank you. Always, as a case gets older, it gets shorter and shorter because less stuff matters. When I edited this case, this is crazy. I edit these cases the day they come out. So the day this case comes out, I edit it that day. And I figure out later what to keep or not. If any of you want in June or July, edit a case, you can ask me. And you go, Josh, I want that case. I'll have it. You won't care in June or July. You'll want nothing to do with me at that time. All right. Questions? All right. Let me wrap up and definitely go to the 1 o'clock event. It'll be actually very, very educational. All right. So we have this chart that we keep describing about the relationship between Congress and the president, and it's sort of premised on this pushback where if the president does something bad, that Congress will defend its own interests. And what happens if Congress doesn't? Right? What happens if Congress agrees with the president and Congress sort of goes along with it? Does the Jackson framework sort of fall apart? And even under John Roberts' conception, when the president acts as authority, Congress can't stop him. And even if it's presumptively immune, then Congress probably can't stop them either. So I think what we've seen in the 20th century is sort of this shift. It's not new. It's been happening for a long time. Shift towards the executive and sort of away from congressional legislation. And even under the Commerce Clause, right? Congress has these broad powers. These powers are delegated to the president. And the president can basically enact broad laws through regulations that are never approved by Congress. So the trend has been executive, and poor low Congress doesn't get to do very much. Yes, sir.
So the push towards delegating regulatory authority to like the SEC, which is under the executive branch, is the push away from legislation into.
Yes. Right. I mean, we will do starting next week the idea of an executive agency and these various so-called independent agencies, which can exercise both rulemaking, executory functions, and adjudicating functions. And now we're actually seeing an attempt by President Trump to overrule some other precedents about the power of him to remove executive officials in these independent agencies. Lots of stuff is live. All right. Anything else? Thank you all so much. I'll see you soon, and have a lovely day.